Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a breakdown of a truly powerful 12-day journal entry. Now, most of us have set a simple language learning goal at some point in our lives, right? Maybe you downloaded an app, bought a phrase book, or told yourself you're finally going to learn French or Spanish or Japanese. But what starts out as a basic attempt to learn a few new words in the specific journal, it completely transforms into an absolute masterclass on self-belief. Because as you'll see, it turns out that learning how to speak a new language is really just learning how to speak to yourself.
Okay, let's dive into this. What happens when fear loses its power? Just take a second right now and consider what you could achieve if you completely stopped focusing on your limitations. Think about the projects you've abandoned, or those skills you've hesitated to even start, simply because the prospect of being quote-unquote bad at them was just too terrifying. That universal human struggle, that's exactly the journey we're mapping out today.
So let's look at the fear of day one, paralyzed by the impossible.
When the author of our source text started out on day one, everything just felt entirely out of reach. I mean, imagine being in a position where every single sentence requires immense effort and every word feels completely foreign and unfamiliar. The author's initial fears were honestly overwhelming. They were afraid to speak, afraid to make mistakes, afraid of being judged, and above all, absolutely afraid of failing. And we've got to recognize that these aren't just minor hesitations. These are massive, paralyzing insecurities that keep people locked in a state of inaction. But the author makes a really crucial realization here during those agonizing first attempts. Their biggest hurdle wasn't a lack of vocabulary or not understanding the grammar rules. It was a deeply rooted, almost physical fear of failing in front of others. They just felt paralyzed by the sheer mountain of what they didn't know.
Which leads us to the great mindset shift, focusing on the possible.
By the time we hit day 12, this profound psychological transformation has kicked in, completely changing the entire trajectory of the author's learning journey. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what changed. The shift is subtle, but it's literally monumental. The mindset shifts entirely from focusing on what they couldn't do to focusing on what they could do. Sounds so simple, right? But this exact shift in mindset is what finally stripped the fear away. See, when you obsess over what you lack, the words you can't remember, the accents you just can't mimic, you actually trigger a stress response. Your brain freezes up. But the author realized that by simply anchoring their attention on the handful of phrases they did know and the small communicative victories they could actually achieve, the fear just evaporated. They weren't ignoring their deficits. They were just choosing to shine a spotlight on their capabilities.
And the breakthrough is perfectly captured when the author notes that while practicing on this 12th day, they suddenly caught themselves speaking for several minutes without stopping. They write, yes, there were mistakes, yes, there were pauses, but there was no fear. Imagine that moment of realization for a second. You're stumbling, you're pausing to find the right word, your grammar is far from perfect, but the anxiety, it's completely gone. You're just communicating. And this proves something massive to us as learners in any field. You do not need to be fluent to be fearless. Fearlessness isn't the absence of mistakes, it's the acceptance of them as a natural part of the learning process. Next up, 12 days of growth, compounding traits of success.
Now, it's super important to understand that this breakthrough didn't just happen by magic overnight. It was the direct result of a daily, deliberate accumulation of specific psychological traits. This is basically a day-by-day roadmap of transformation. Days 1 to 6 build the foundation. It starts with raw courage on day 1, just the sheer guts to open your mouth and try. That courage naturally demands patience on day 2 because, trying is frustrating. When you are patient with yourself, you can build consistency on day 3. You start showing up. Showing up leads to resilience on day 4, which is the ability to bounce back from a terrible practice session. That resilience breeds confidence on day 5, which finally enables genuine communication on day 6. Then, days 7 to 12, they take it to the next level. You add discipline, deeper listening, and persistence. By day 10, you have rock-solid commitment, which fuels unstoppable action on day 11, culminating in ultimate belief on day 12. These traits, they compound like interest. Courage alone is just a spark, but when you stack these traits after your day, you build a roaring fire of disciplined, consistent action.
But the foundational takeaway is this: without belief, none of this works. You will quit before success arrives. The author emphasizes that you can have all the best resources in the world, the most expensive books, the elite courses, the perfectly optimized flashcard apps, but they are ultimately useless if you don't possess the internal belief that your own improvement is actually possible. I mean, think about a time you bought a gym membership or a new software tool or a masterclass and just let it gather dust. You had the external tools, but you lacked the internal conviction that you could change. Belief is the engine that actually puts those resources to use. Let's look at the core vocabulary of success, words that build momentum.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how, as the author learned English over these 12 days, the actual vocabulary words they acquired began to perfectly reflect their own internal psychological transformation. By the final day, the new words being logged weren't just everyday conversational fillers. They were words like believe, growth, commitment, achievement, momentum. The language of their studies literally became the language of their self-improvement. When you consciously adopt words like commitment and momentum into your daily vocabulary, you actually start to reshape how your brain approaches failure. You stop framing things as setbacks, and you start framing them as necessary friction for growth. It bridges the gap between simple language learning and these incredibly powerful universal concepts of success.
Success begins the moment you stop doubting your ability to improve. Just let that sink in for a second. The moment doubt vanishes, real success begins. This isn't just about learning English or passing a test. It's about a fundamental law of human potential. If you harbor secret doubts that you can get better at something, you will instinctively sabotage your own efforts to protect your ego. But the second you genuinely accept that your abilities are not fixed and that effort equals improvement, the ceiling on your potential shatters. You become unstoppable.
Let's move to and see how this builds into trusting the process, progress over perfection. This brings us to the final stage of the author's journey, which is all about accepting that mistakes will still happen and realizing that is completely okay. By day 12, the author noticed 4 highly practical outcomes. First, they speak more. Because they speak more, their brain gets used to the flow. So, second, they hesitate less. Because they hesitate less, their mental bandwidth is freed up from anxiety, meaning third, they actually learn faster. And fourth, they simply trust the process. This causal chain is just beautiful. Action reduces hesitation, which accelerates learning, which cements trust in the system you've built. When you finally trust the process, the anxiety of doing it right is fully replaced by the thrill of getting it done.
Because ultimately, this journey is not about perfection. It's about progress. While many challenges remain for the author on day 13 and beyond, their goal is simply to be a stronger version of themselves, not a perfect one. Think of perfection like a giant anchor. It demands that you stay exactly where you are until you are flawlessly equipped to move forward, which basically means you never move. Progress, on the other hand, is a path. It allows you to take messy, imperfect steps forward. The pursuit of perfection will only slow you down and weigh you down, for sure. But embracing the messy reality of progress, that's what actually keeps you moving towards your ultimate destination.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. What could you achieve if you finally stopped doubting yourself and trusted your own process? Think about how you can apply this 12-day blueprint beyond just language learning. What if you applied it to a career pivot you've been putting off, or a new fitness routine, or even repairing a relationship? The compounding traits of courage, consistency, and belief, they work absolutely everywhere. Keep practicing, keep improving, and never stop believing in yourself. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.